Victory. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm Alicia Lee, and if I were you, I would grab a pen, a pencil, something to write with, get your sticky note, get a notepad, because what we have in store for you today, you will want to take notes. Today, we have a special guest with us today, Dr. Chanda Reynolds. Thank you for joining us. Ladies, let's welcome Dr. Reynolds.
Thank you for having me.
And if you could just let everybody know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Reynolds. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist with a private practice in D.C., and it is my passion to help people overcome their traumas, especially us in the Black church.
Thank you. So, ladies, we're going to jump right into it, and let's talk with Dr. Chanda Reynolds. The first question I want to start with, the Black community has for ages dismissed mental health issues as well as hidden traumas within families. How do you introduce or create a safe space for them to begin healing even 20 to 30 years later?
Yeah, that's another amazing question. Pastor Tony was getting on me yesterday because I kept saying that. But no, it's really a great question. I think some of the things that we experience as Black people, like you said, have been brushed under the rug. And as a result, we get to a point where we're not comfortable with talking about our traumas. Even very things that reminds us of specific past traumas related to the Black community, it can cause us to be set back in relationships, cause us to be set back in our self-worth and self-esteem. And so one of the primary ways in order to target this is to start having these conversations. And in order to have these conversations, we have to have more spaces like this where, we see other Black women, Black people who are really striving and thriving in their ministries and career and things of that nature, and allowing us to know that it's okay to experience trauma, but it's our responsibility in order to heal from it.
Okay, so we are, ladies, as we're talking, and we started off with a question regarding trauma. The next question we're going to have Shakita ask.
Hey, okay, so the next question is, what are some common signs and triggers for someone who may have experienced trauma?
Yeah, so some of the experiences of trauma can impact us in several domains of our lives. One of them is physically, right? So physically, people who experience trauma can experience things like hypervigilance or feeling constantly on edge or constantly feeling like they're being startled. Also, increases in irritability and anger, thinking about ways that our body reacts to it. So think about what we call that fight or flight system, right? So when the body's fight or flight system is activated, then we're more likely to, again, be on edge, and that causes our, what we call the sympathetic nervous system in our bodies to activate. And when that system is activated, it releases things like cortisol, which is a hormone in the body. And when cortisol is released overreactively, it gets to a point where it's not healthy, and that can start to impact us physically. So that's just one area. Also, I kind of alluded to in the previous question, relationships. So if I've been triggered or hurt in a past relationship, I can bring that same trauma, whether it's related to me being unsafe around other people, I can bring that into a new relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, a platonic relationship, or a friendship. We can always carry past traumas if we're not aware of it. And also thinking about how we show up in the world. Sometimes when I see people who experience trauma, they often have what we call a cognition. We told on that yesterday. We have cognitions about how the world is unsafe, and that impacts their ability to go out and to venture out and to doing new things. So it's multiple ways that trauma can impact people.
Thank you for that. Our next question will come from Shantae.
Okay, so my question is, with the amount of unspoken childhood traumas in adults today, do you feel that this is a major reason for today's erratic behaviors in adults?
Yes. So when thinking about like traumas, again, like that impacts us in several domains of our lives. And when it goes unprocessed, then those are areas where they continue to be elicited or evoked. So we think why am I provoked so much in these same types of situations? It could definitely be related to our past, right? And so especially when we're talking about adults and we're talking about people who have experienced things that were scary or abusive or, again, traumatic in the past, and we're bringing this into our future, imagine how our kids are being impacted. Right? So imagine how our kids are being impacted, whether that's through what we call modeling or them watching us respond to certain life situations, or through what we call just a biological predisposition to trauma. So basically meaning because our forefathers experienced trauma, that can impact our DNA, and that same DNA is passed down from generation to generation. And that's why when we see, I love the first question you asked about like Black trauma, that's why we see individuals in the Black community responding in the same way when we experience traumatic situations, right? So it's all a matter of how it impacts us. It definitely impacts us, again, physically, from a DNA level, from a relational level, from a cognitive level. And when we're not dealing with it, especially adults who have experienced these traumas, again, it can continue to be passed down to the next generation. So,
All right, Deaconess Lavelle.
In Black culture and even the Black church, we seem to limit the definition of trauma to physical or sexual abuse, when the true definition can be vast and individualized. Would you address how we as Christians and the local church can minister to, address, and aid others impacted by trauma, including shared ones like the pandemic, war, global issues, police brutality, racism, colorism, and addiction?
That's an excellent question. So, I'm a firm believer in more mental health clinicians building relationships with the church. Because, like you said, when we talk about trauma, we often categorize it into just physical abuse or sexual abuse. But there are so many categories of trauma. Did y'all know religious trauma was a thing? Yes. Religious trauma, yes, spiritual, like all of that, right? And there are actually psychologists out there who have specific therapeutic protocols to help people with those specific types of traumas. But if we don't know about it in the church, how can we get them the help that they really need? So, I'm, again, a firm believer that this gap needs to be bridged between the Black church and mental health clinicians so that we can have more professionals here who are working with ministers like you all and to really help our congregants. You're not a minister? No? Okay. You're not? Okay. My friend says she's not a minister. My bad.
Let me be one.
I got to talk to Pastor
they
Tony
let
then.
me be one.
Okay, I'll meet with Pastor Tony. So I think there just has to be a better relationship with that.
All right. So based on your experience, what environmental, social, and or other factors that may influence the probability of someone who may have experienced trauma becoming a substance abuse user?
Yeah, so when we think about like our communities, right? So experiencing things like community violence, which is also related to trauma. It's like everything is related to, it can all connect. But when we're talking about these events and people don't see hope in their future, we call it a foreshortened sense of the future. So basically individuals who operate just on the day-to-day. I don't see a future for myself, therefore I'm just going to live in the moment, and that's why we do see so many people doing what we call like invited suicide, especially in our neighborhoods, and like Black neighborhoods. Like, I don't care if you kill me, go ahead and, that type of, so that type of rhetoric, that was actually a term coined by Dr. Joy DeGroy, who wrote the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. But when we talk about our communities and we're not seeing hope and we're not giving them opportunities to excel and showing them what life looks like beyond, of course they're going to fall into that hopeless cycle and feeling as though, I have to detach from my reality. And the best way that they might know how to do that is through substance abuse. And so, we talked about yesterday during our amazing panel that I was so blessed by, that everything has a root. Right, and so we have to really get to the understanding of like the different roots of where some of these substance abuse behaviors come from, because they're likely associated with, again, wanting to escape, wanting to feel like they're in control of what's happening in their lives. Like it can be related to so many things.
All right. Chanda, do you have another question?
I do. Speaking about generations, with our generation having knowledge of wellness opportunities, how do you encourage your older relatives who have experienced trauma to seek therapy? Because it's kind of hard to tell Aunt Joan after she told you her story from when she was 13, but now she's 60 and you know that she needs some help. How do you convince, for lack of better words, her to seek therapy?
Yeah, we got to meet Aunt Joan where she is. So, I run into this type of question all the time where people do have like older relatives who feel as though like they experience real life traumas. Even thinking about my parents, like going through the civil rights era and stuff, that's traumatic, right? But when thinking about like how we can convince them, the best way we can do that is by modeling. right? So we model the behavior that we want other people to follow. Hey, Aunt Joan, I've been in therapy for, a couple weeks, and it's really been helping me. Here's what we've been talking about, and kind of sharing those experiences. And that might be able to be that bridge that will plant the seed in Aunt Joan to help her to want to seek services herself.
All right. I believe your friend here, Shakita, has another question
Yeah,
as
we're
well.
friends. Okay, so just really fast. Like last night, you spoke about having a third party. So say like Aunt Jones is going through something, and say like you have a friend that's a therapist, and like, hey, come out to eat with me and Aunt Jones, and then we can just have like a discussion and stuff like that. So I'm gonna call you later, so you can come sit with us.
No, that's a good point, friend. Can I also point out, like, that's why roles like the bishop synagogues and the pastor Tonys are so important, because research does indicate that when you have a pastor who advocates for therapy and they're in the pulpit talking about the importance of it, then the members are more likely to be engaged in it and they're more trustworthy of the therapeutic relationship. So that's why, I really appreciate opportunities like this where I can share that information.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask this question. All right, so why do you think there is a stigma with Christians believing in prayer only, and if not, considering effective counseling when dealing with trauma or mental illness?
Okay. That's a great question. Can I add something in there? Let me read it.
I wrote it myself.
Oh, this is good, friend.
Okay,
Good
I'm
friend.
lying. I'm lying.
No, she did. I can't, friend. We got to talk about that later.
That line spirit. I need help.
Right. Okay, so why do you think there is a stigma with, I'm going to say black Christians. I'm going to insert black in there. Okay. Because, the unmelanated saints been going to therapy for years.
Yeah.
So I just want to highlight that. But I think for so many, I can't. I think for so many years, though, like, we've been taught, especially in the black community, that we have to internalize, we have to suppress in order to remain strong, right? And so because of that, it's only natural for some of the things that we've been taught in our communities for us to bring it into the church world, right? And so simply because, like I said yesterday, simply because it's normalized doesn't mean that it's okay. It doesn't mean that it's adaptive. It doesn't mean that it's functional. So we really have to get to a place to where we dismantle these ideas that aren't necessarily biblical or relevant for this time, but this is more so cultural, right? So we are a people who suppress our emotions, and we have to learn how to detach from that, because there are plenty of Christian therapists out there, black Christian therapists and psychologists who are willing to help and to work with us. So,
All right, now we're gonna have you finish. You finished, friend?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna have someone who hasn't who we haven't heard from yet. Miss Dawn, you have a question?
Okay. I was saying my question is similar, although you already touched bases on this, but the question is, how can we help as non-therapists someone who may have experienced trauma?
Yeah. So another great question. So when thinking about like trauma, we talked about how it can impact how we show up relationally, right? So if I'm not feeling safe with other people, that might cause me to, internalize my emotions and to not want to talk about certain things. The best thing that we can do, though, as people who aren't like clinicians, we can just create safe spaces. And so a safe space might look like asking your friend who experienced this trauma, like, what do you need from me in this moment? Do you need me to listen? Do you need me to support you? Do you need advice? And for them, having that safe space, then they'll feel more likely to be able to open up and share.
All right. So we're gonna kind of switch gears a little bit and go into triggers and depression. So how do you carefully respond to someone's triggers without feeling offended or disregarding their actual feelings?
Yeah, so when talking about triggers, okay. So when talking about triggers and things of that nature, it's really important to acknowledge when people identify and stress their triggers to you, it's, I'm just going to say, you shouldn't be offended by that. That's that person setting a boundary, right? So if they feel like you're crossing that boundary in any way, it's 100% okay for them to it's perfectly okay for them to acknowledge some of these triggers and to identify what exactly set them off in the first place. And so when we're talking about boundary setting, it's important for these individuals to look at some of the things that have been highlighted for them in the past. What were those triggers? And so what was the latter part of that question?
How do you carefully respond to someone's triggers without feeling offended or disregarding their actual feelings?
Disregarding it is where I really want to highlight that, because it's so easy to disregard somebody's feelings. But it's important to validate. If somebody shares with you a lived experience, some of their emotions that they personally felt, we have to let them know, like, okay, I understand why you're experiencing that way. Right, I understand why you're experiencing that emotion. It doesn't mean I have to agree with you. It doesn't mean that we're on the same page with that. I'm just saying, as a human, I can empathize with that emotion.
Okay. All right, our next question will come from Marcella.
What do you perceive to be the most effective when using cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness to treat individuals with anxiety?
Yeah, so when talking about anxiety, again, that's just one of those diagnoses that impacts people in multiple areas of their lives. So whether it's behaviorally, from a thought-based lens, from a physical angle. And so one of the main ways that we treat anxiety, the best form of treatment is that cognitive behavioral therapy. So finding ways in which we can identify some of those negative thought patterns and changing the thought pattern. And for believers, I always encourage us to restructure our thoughts so that they're aligned with the Word of God. So
that's good. Chanda, you have another question for triggers and depression?
So I do. In order to respect someone's triggers, what's the right way to put this question? You want to respect their triggers, but at the same time, you don't want to enable them. Because a lot of times people know their triggers, and you may know, so they'll use them to gain your emotion. So how do you walk that line so that you empower but not enable?
Yeah, and so I think the original question when we talked about triggers and things of that nature, we went into the realm of boundary setting, right? So if I'm triggered in this way, setting a boundary with a family member or friend who caused that person to be triggered. But also on the receiving end, you have every right to set boundaries for yourself too, right? So if I'm offended by someone, or I feel as though their behaviors are being enabled in some way, and I don't want that in my circle, like, you can set a boundary. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to cut the relationship off, but you're just letting that person know you have expectations as well. So that's just another way to navigate it.
Okay. All right. Yes, you have a question. She about to get it out. Okay. Come out.
Okay. As a therapist myself, being previously going through depression and making it through it, how do you handle when you sit with other clients that presently struggle in depression, but they can't tell that God has delivered you? How do you walk that fine line of giving them what they need book-wise, but also using your Holy Spirit to guide you and not break down in a session because your heart feels for them?
Right. I'm a firm believer in appropriate self-disclosure, right? So with our clients, of course, we're supposed to have boundaries, and we're not supposed to overshare from an ethical standpoint. But also, from the ethical standpoint, we're allowed to share if it's going to be beneficial to that client. Right, so even if you want to kind of expound on your personal experience and say, I know someone who was dealing with this, that's one way to navigate it. But also, I ask the Holy Spirit, like, okay, what types of questions do you need me to ask this person? What types of things do you want me to bring up in this session? I will never forget, I asked that, and the Lord led me to ask a teenager about her relationship with her mother. That girl just started breaking down. Right? And that's just how the Holy Ghost works, right? So when we rely more on the Holy Spirit and the Holy Ghost and how we should be formulating questions, that can also guide our decision making as well. But there's also protocols out there. I think it's RCBT, so it's a religious CBT is what it's called, but it's from a Christian perspective. And so I'm not sure if you have access to that or you do. Okay, all right. Because if you did, I could always send it to you. But, it just outlines how we can help Christians, reformulate their thought patterns from a Christian-based perspective. And yes, and so that I found that has been very helpful for my clients as well.
Thank you for that information. And there's one other question. Can someone with depression develop worsening mental health issues by sticking to the same daily routines with no guidance or help?
Yeah, so when people experience depression, one of the things that could happen if it's not being targeted is it can worsen. It'll either stay the same or it can worsen. There might be cases where, of course, like from a biological standpoint, if neurotransmitters are beginning to balance out somehow, they can start to feel better. But in most of the cases that I've seen, when it's untreated, it either stays the same, stays stagnant, or it does continue to decrease in terms of the symptomology or intensify. And so that's why it's important to kind of reach out and receive the help that you need. Even if you're not ready to start therapy yet, there are therapeutic things that you can begin doing in order to increase like serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine and all those other neurotransmitters that helps to improve our mood.
All right. Friend, do you have another question to ask?
I do. Okay, so does anxiety, depression, or mental illness issues Okay, so hold on. Does anxiety, depression, or mental illness issues that parents experience, does it affect their children's behavior health? If so, then why?
Yeah, it certainly can, right? So there's a possibility that children can be affected because of what I had alluded to earlier, the biological predisposition to certain mental health conditions, right? That's why I again talked about it yesterday, but I'm a believer that we have to go into our bloodline and really start praying against some of these things so that we aren't passing them on to our next generation. But when talking about this, it can happen, right, from a biological perspective. But also we got to think about what we're modeling to our children, so what we are showing them. So do your children see you kind of panicking or experiencing intense anxiety when things aren't going your way? Or do they see you experiencing that thing and also being able to effectively cope with it? Because whatever you model, whatever you're showing your kid, they're going to pick up on that, and they may start behaving in that same way. Oftentimes parents say, do as I say, not as I do. Kids ain't gonna do that. They're gonna do exactly what they see you doing. Right. And so when they see us exhibiting behaviors, we're basically normalizing it for them. Mommy does it, so I'm gonna just do it too. Right?
So that is absolutely the truth. I had this conversation with my daughter and actually with my mother today because last night we were here and we were taught that strong and hard is different. And I realized that for so long, I was always strong, like, you take pain. And I'm not a person who, falls out if I have pain. Literally, I can have issues that people would be crippled with, and I'm good. I'm walking around, and I realized that those behaviors are in my children because they don't see mommy hurt. They don't see mommy cry. Wow. And so I literally had to look at my oldest daughter. She'll be 21 this year. And I said, no, you can't do that. If something hurts, say that. Because if not, then you're going to walk around with that pain, and I don't want you to be me. Yeah. So that is so true, and I just wanted to share that because it's like an eye-opener. You do something for so long, and you do it so wrong.
Exactly. And what you did when you said that to your daughter, you disrupted that cycle. Right? So we can verbally express to our children, listen, I know you may have seen me doing it this way, but let's try it differently. Let's go about it from a different approach. And you can continue to be that example of change for her.
That's something that I was talking to one of my nieces about too, because she would, if she would do something, if she would fall, and she'll get back up, and she'll just look and maybe rub her leg or rub what's really hurting, and she'll say, I'm okay, and I'll say, no, are you okay? What's hurting? Are you hurting? Did you hurt your arm? Did you hurt your leg? What's hurting? Tell us if it hurts. And then she'll say, yes, this hurts, or yes, that hurts. So I think walking around we show what we don't show affect the children too. Yeah. And Exactly. Deaconess Lavelle, do you have a question?
Mental health has become almost trendy. Terms like self-care, gaslighting, narcissism, OCD are used in church and in culture quite freely. Would you offer some context for how we can legitimize the mental health conversation alongside ministry conversations or spiritual conversations? And can you offer suggestions or give language to use when we're discussing mental health, when we're in the church community, or when we're having discipling conversations or ministry conversations?
Yeah, that's excellent. So, I would encourage us first to just really educate ourselves about the true meaning of that stuff. So, I'm a person, like, I love social media, but certain information we just can't get from social media because everybody's not a narcissist. Your ex maybe have had maladaptive behaviors, but it doesn't mean they were a narcissist. Everybody doesn't have OCD. Everybody doesn't have bipolar. These have just become buzzwords more frequently. And so when we really get into the definition and really understanding what some of these diagnoses are, I think we will use them less frequently, as frequently as we do. So again, like, that's why it's really important to have people like therapists in the church and to really talk about, like, what these specific things mean, what the diagnosis mean, what gaslighting means, and how that presents in our lives, because it's easy to be able to take information from what we see on social media or even in mainstream media and on TV or what have you and apply it, and it's actually incorrect. So.
All right, we have one more question from Ms. Dawn regarding this topic.
Okay, now it's on. Sorry about that. What advice would you give someone who displays irrational behaviors, suffers from depression, anxiety, and trying to self-medicate without seeking professional help?
That's a loaded question. Honestly, in situations like that, if people are in a place to where they are self-medicating and it's hard for them to see that it's an issue, as family members, of course, we can kind of bring the conversation to the forefront and let them know, like, how behaviors could be impacting us or the family or what have you. But also, I'm a firm believer in praying. Like, I talked to the young people yesterday about how simply praying about things can plant a seed in our loved ones, whether they are experiencing substance abuse or what have you. And when those seeds are planted, then they might start to feel convicted about some of the things that they're experiencing, right? Because, like you said, people might have these behaviors that we see as maladaptive or dysfunctional, but it doesn't mean that they see it that way. This could be their norm, right? And so if somebody else is pointing it out to them and we're also praying for them, then we're more likely to see them, at least, again, planting that seed and possibly seeing that change that we want to see.
All right, so ladies, we're going to switch gears one more time and kind of go in the direction of behavioral health. So is there a common time frame in seeing a change in the state of someone's behavioral health?
Yeah, so it depends on the therapeutic treatment protocol. So one thing that, like, a lot of people don't know when it's their first time seeking therapy with me is that there are different therapeutic techniques that therapists use, right? So I'm more of what we call the CBT-based therapist. And so with CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, that's more so like a shorter term type of therapy. And so the research indicates that you'll start seeing those types of results in between 12 to 16 sessions. But for someone else who might be more psychodynamic, or is what we call it, so, the images you might see on TV where the person is laying down on the couch just talking, that would be more so that psychodynamic therapy. And those individuals might benefit after, like, years of being in therapy. So it's really all contingent on the type of modality that therapist is utilizing.
Seeing that on TV, I thought that was like the normal thing.
Really?
Like that, yes. I just thought, like, oh, all right. Well, maybe I need to go lay on somebody's couch and just talk. You did. I did. Okay. Okay, Muzz. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you need to. Yeah. Sometimes, like, girls call somebody up. Listen, I just need to let this out real quick. I can't hold it in no more. But then we do need to get that professional help as well.
Yes.
Marcella, do you have a question?
What are effective strategies that can be used to minimize triggers in individuals with a traumatic brain injury?
That's a great question. So I don't have a ton of experience with TBI, traumatic brain injuries. So I can't really provide any specific like evidence on that. So I don't know, to be honest.
Okay. Ms. Dawn, you have a question?
I'm glad you were honest.
Yes, because listen,
Yeah.
one thing
I'm
I
so
hate
glad.
is
Yeah, because you could have sat here and said a whole bunch of big words, and we would have been like, right. So I'm joking.
no, because that's very common.
I wouldn't.
Like,
I wouldn't have said that. If you would have been saying big words, I'd have been like, no, ma'am, no, ma'am.
Child, not me. I'm like, right. Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
Friend is, you'll get used to friend.
She loves me.
If you
She
haven't
loves
already.
me
If you haven't
already. We are friends in real life. Like, we're going out later. No, we're not. But
Okay, Ms. Dawn.
Do you need my mic?
With the microphone. There we go. Okay, my question is also. My question is also in reference to the CBT. Does CBT have a high success rate in reference to the turnaround or outcome of helping people overcome various mental illness disorders?
Short answer, yes. So yeah, CBT has been proven to be very effective. There's lots of bodies of research that highlights the effectiveness of CBT, specifically related to anxiety and depression. It's been proven to be more effective than like medications and things. So when people utilize CBT in a combination with medication, then they're more likely to see long-lasting and optimal results. But CBT from the short term is actually more effective than that. So yeah.
I have a question from another one of our co-hosts. She's not here right now, but she did want to ask this question, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it for her. Do you believe mindfulness sessions implemented in the teaching and learning environment are advantages to improving academic outcomes?
Yes, so again, and I don't want to sound too nerdy, but again, with like the research, right? So the research does indicate that when, especially children at that school age, they utilize mindfulness strategies. It does help them with like relaxation, being able to go to school more calmly, and being able to focus for longer and more sustained amounts of time. So mindfulness has been very effective with helping people in the educational realm.
So then I have a question. I have a child with a disability. And so do you think that that is something that would help? Because how do you recognize if it's just a part of the disability or if, let's just say, they have anxiety or struggle with depression? Because, I mean, you really can't tell from a non-clinical standpoint. As a parent, you know something is not right. But mine, she's only 6, and she does not have any depression.
Okay.
She is oppressing me. But just to know if like behavioral therapy would help, it like you could be talking to her, and if she does not want to hear you, she's not going to hear you. She really will not. So just what are some tips that would help parents with children with disabilities?
How old is she?
6, 66.
Turning 66. 6 going on 66, okay. So for that age group, it's a little bit more difficult. So mindfulness is usually used for kids who have greater ability to intellectualize and to like be more introspective is the word, to be more introspective. And so with younger kids who don't really have that ability to utilize like attention and to be able to focus for a brief amount of time, it may not be as effective. But it's all depending on like what your child is experiencing. The other part of your question, like how to decipher between diagnoses, sometimes you can determine like what the specific contributing factors are by testing. So I don't know if you've ever had her tested by a psychologist, but that can help to kind of like parse out what's contributing to what.
So they do testing in school, of course. They get pulled out by several therapists and things like that, you know, for their daily routines. But my fear is that because they want to put these labels on your child. So, I mean, everyone here already knows my daughter has Down syndrome. So a lot of times they try to dual diagnose. And so they'll say, oh, Down syndrome and ADHD. And it could just be, they're just being a kid. You know, like, she doesn't want to sit down. She has this thing where they think that she's not listening, and so she'll come home and say everything that they said in school, and then I'll record it, and I'll send it back to them, and they'll be like, oh, we gave her a 0 because she wasn't listening. And I'm like, no, she said it one time, and she doesn't want to do it 3. So, or maybe she just doesn't like you today. I don't really know what, so just trying to avoid having a dual diagnosis that is not the diagnosis because it sounds clinically correct. So how do you get around that? Because of course they're going to look at you as a parent. Now for me, I'm different because I'm in the healthcare field. I actually work in neurology and a bunch of other things for cognitive issues. But another parent, they could just say, oh, your child has, and you don't know. So how do you just take them to therapy? And what's the starting age? Like, is 6 too young? Is a kindergartner too young to go to behavioral therapy, or an 8-year-old?
It depends on the type of therapy. So like with like talk therapy, it would be a little bit more difficult for a 6-year-old to want to engage in that. But things like play therapy can be helpful. Even what we call parent-child interaction therapy, that's something that we use with like younger kids and their parent. But also I want you to keep in mind, so like the school testing and stuff, that I'm sure your child's school is great, but also are they, and are they specializing in what your child needs, right? So it's usually just, school psychologists who are pretty much testing a lot of kids during the day, not knocking them, but it might be good to take your child to like a specialty clinic. I don't know if you've heard of like Kennedy Krieger Institute. Yeah, so I used to work there. Yes, exactly. So have you been there before?
No, we're on the waiting list.
Okay,
which is probably, she'll get there when she's 18 because that's how long the waiting list is. But it's just a matter of, I think that that's a good thing. And like I said, I'm asking this question, but there are parents out there who don't know the answer to this or who are looking for answers. But yes, that is a good thing to get on the Kennedy Krieger waiting list, or go outside of that, see outside the network. But she definitely is on the waiting list because I do not want them to just diagnose her. Like you said, as a school psychologist, she does well with like the occupational therapist can get her to do anything. And for me, that's the Holy Spirit. Because I feel like, for me, the most truthful people in the world, and I've said this basically my whole life, an alcoholic, an older person, and a baby. You're going to get the truth from them all the time, except for about themselves. Right. Like, they're going to tell you with their emotions. A baby can't talk to you and tell you, but if you put my daughter in the space where she does not feel your spirit, she ain't giving you nothing. She's going to shut down immediately. But people who she loves, she's going to talk to you all day. Whatever language she's speaking that day, that's what she's going to talk to you in. And the older person the same, but it's just about not diagnosing people incorrectly.
That's good.
I had a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you use a different treatment modality for believers than non-believers?
So usually if I have a believer who wants that Christian-based perspective, then I do use a different treatment modality. But sometimes I have Christians who don't even, how do I put it? So they might not value the faith to the same level as somebody else. And as a general psychologist, I wouldn't necessarily impose my own personal beliefs or what I think they need, because they might not be willing to hear it, right? So I do try to transition and meet that client where they are.
Speaking of Laval, you have another question?
What helpful tips or motivation would you recommend to someone dealing with PTSD on how to move forward and remain positive?
Yeah, so if someone's dealing with PTSD, I think it's really important to go to therapy for those. I know that's the reinforcing message we have today, but PTSD can really impact people in several areas of their lives. And so in order to really help them from a CBT perspective, to really help them kind of like move past it, we do what we call like trauma narratives and, things that'll help to re-expose them to the event that happened so that they can eventually like overcome some of those emotional experiences, the cognitions, like all those different things will be helpful from that angle.
Can you explain a little bit more about PTSD? Because I know a lot of times we've heard that term and people relate it to somebody who was in Vietnam. Or, like people don't understand that PTSD could be from years of stuff that you just have backed up. So now you react to something. So can you explain PTSD?
Absolutely, yeah. So PTSD is basically when an individual experiences some sort of traumatic event, and then that person is impacted in several areas of their lives. So usually it includes like physically, and physically can include sleep, hypervigilance, or again, like that startle response, feeling as though they can't eat, or, all those, again, the physical domains we talked about earlier. From a behavioral angle, so feeling as though they're avoiding certain things, like if I'm reminded by, let's say I'm traumatized by a car accident, right? So I can't get in the car. So that's me behaviorally avoiding that specific thing. And even cognitively, so developing different cognitions related to that event, such as I'll never be able to drive again, dealing with that accident example. And when dealing, again, with like PTSD, it's really important to remember that just because we experience the trauma doesn't mean we have PTSD. Because I know sometimes people might label themselves with that, but PTSD is when I'm having all these symptoms, but 6 months later, they're still prevalent in my life, right? So it's that time frame that really differentiates that.
Now, speaking on trauma, in your experience, do you see a difference in outcomes for people who receive therapy when the trauma first happened versus those who didn't receive therapy or may have waited until years down the line to receive services?
Yes, that's a good question. So in my personal experience, people who do experience trauma, who come in a little bit earlier, do experience more benefit. I don't know the specific research on that. However, I will tell you that when people experience a traumatic event, they're more susceptible to experiencing more trauma, right? So if trauma is happening and it's continuing to happen and they haven't sought services, it's just going to intensify the symptoms. Right, so if we wait longer to get that help, that might impact their ability to be able to receive from the therapeutic treatment.
Okay. Dignus Nishas, do you have another question?
Have you ever experienced countertransference from a patient?
Yes. Okay, so
how did you handle it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So countertransference basically is when a psychologist or therapist has some sort of reaction toward like a client. Yeah. And that can come from various angles, whether it's like resistance to the therapy, like if I'm giving you different strategies to use and you're resistant, like, no, it's not going to work, or I'm not willing to do the work. It can impact you. It can impact the therapist. Therapists are people too. I recently had a situation, but I made sure I I did a consultation with one of my homegirls, Dr. Afia. She's in the DC area, but I called her up and we kind of talked it through. Most of the time when you're experiencing countertransference or that sort of reaction to the client, it can be used in the session. It can be therapeutic, right? So imagine the example I'm giving about like resistance. So think about having a resistant client and you're experiencing some type of way about that, kind of bringing that up into the room. Like, I'm noticing that there's some resistance here. I wonder how other people in your life could be experiencing, because I'm getting a little frustrated with it, and kind of bringing that into the room and letting them know, like, I'm not the only one in your life probably feeling this way. So like, let's check this.
No, I have a therapist, right? Yeah. But she's so hood, right? So, yeah, she is. She's actually the therapist for me. When I say she hood, I be looking at her like, you just said that? So it's just like, should a therapist talk a certain type of way when they're talking to you? But like, 'cause I can literally be on the phone with her and like talking to my homegirl. But I know she's not my homegirl, but the way she talk, I sometimes be like, you my therapist or my home? 'Cause the words she used, and I'm like, you just said that word? Yeah. So is that a good thing? Because she's helped me a lot. Like, I believe, like, I'm the way I am now because she helped me get through some things that I was going through. So, like, is there a certain, what's the word I want to use? So can she be cussing and stuff when we on the phone?
I know psychologists, I know therapists who curse. But it depends. Yeah,
she be going in.
But it all depends on like what your client is comfortable with, because it has to do with kind of like meeting them halfway. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I know a psychologist who curses with their teenage clients and lets their teenage clients curse with them because it's building rapport. Oh. It like builds that trustworthiness with them. But it really all depends on like what that psychologist. I gotta remember we in church right now.
Yeah.
But
it's so funny because I don't cuss. And when she said curse word, y'all don't know my story, so y'all think y'all know me, but y'all do not know me. I don't cuss. I may look like I cuss, but I don't cuss. Out loud.
What does cuss look like? A mirror?
Not to look up and down.
Yeah, I looked her right up and down like, child. But yeah, but no, I'm just saying, like, is it a certain, like, is that okay? I don't mind it because she really has helped me. But I just want to know, it's like a certain way you're supposed to talk to your client.
Yeah. So, I mean, people have different standards in their professionalism, right? So I'm a firm believer, and I'm not even going to act like I always been this way. Like, I don't believe in code switching anymore. I used to be the one who was like all, primmed and propped up, and, if they're going to respect me, I have to speak a certain way. And it's just not like that. Because if you're not going to respect me, you're just not going to respect me in the first place. So I'm going to give you all of me. And you can decide if you want to be my client or not. If not, I have a waiting list of people who would.
That's how I feel like friendship. Like, I'm going to give you all of me. You either accept it or I got a waiting list. Right, that's how you got on there.
Right,
because we friends. But yeah, thank you so much.
I have another question. Do you feel that every therapist should have a therapist of their own?
Yes, certainly, because we experience things like countertransference, right? And so it's really important for us to have an outlet, somebody else to kind of talk through what we're experiencing, because like I said, we're people too, right? We're people too.
Pastor need a therapist?
No, I said besides the pastors.
Oh, I thought you said.
The pastors need therapists too. Pastors need therapists too.
That's what you
If you would have heard that.
So I do have another question. As a therapist, how do you deal with burnout?
Yeah, so I try to make sure that I'm giving time to myself, and whatever that looks like. So I make sure I have some time at least to go to the nail salon or have my weekends to myself to catch up on notes or rest or what have you. But in this therapy life, like it's overwhelming, especially since the pandemic. I'm sure you can attest to that because people are just really in need of services. So as a psychologist, as a therapist, like you really have to make sure we're protecting our time.
Okay. And if you are, go ahead.
How do you make more time for yourself if you have taken on extra responsibilities like marriage, children? Yeah, that's extra responsibility.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm asking her how to handle it.
Okay.
You
shows
mean
like this.
No, you're good. You mean like extra clients, like marriage related clients?
I mean, like
Personally. She's talking about personally.
And I have two different jobs. I'm a therapist, and I have two different jobs where I do what I do. And then in between each one, I have to take time out to get myself together before I shift into the next one. So I'm starting over brand new, like it's a whole new day. And then when I'm done with both of those jobs, I have a family, and I'm newly married. So just trying to handle all of those things and still find time for myself and find time for the family also. When everybody is like, my, babe, phone ringing, all that.
And choir rehearsal that you don't come to.
No, that's a good question. Marriage and kids, that ain't my testimony yet, but
Let me just throw this card away.
But I will say, like, sometimes as busy people, and not even just a therapist, but as busy people, we have to know, like, when it's time to outsource. So, I'm a firm believer, like, if I don't have time to do laundry or what have you, I'm going to have somebody else do it. I just hired a personal assistant who does all my scheduling and my books and stuff. Like, if you can, like, find someone who's affordable and within your price range, even, like, food and stuff, right? So, Safeway, groceries, and like they deliver. So that can be something that's outsourced. But also I would encourage you to optimize your time as a therapist. So I recently started doing groups. So shameless plug, I have a group therapy for Black women for anybody who wants to join. But you can optimize your time by doing more groups. That way you're helping a lot of people within a smaller amount of time, and you'll have more free time to do other things.
So we can
In
all,
person.
you might see us all in your group therapy.
Yeah.
Can we go back to the PTSD topic? You were talking about therapy that kind of the way I've heard of it before is how you make a hot memory, like a less active memory. Can you talk some more about that so people understand? Well, so we're understanding about PTSD and dealing with those kind of traumas.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So when thinking of the hot memory, right? So that's basically when an individual has a memory of the past trauma and they experience it like it's real life, right? So a lot of times that happens because at the time of the trauma, that memory wasn't properly encoded into the brain, into the autobiographical memory, for a lot of reasons. When we hear about people experiencing trauma, they say like, oh, I don't know what was going on, or I was disassociating, or I was daydreaming while it was happening. And we know, like, when that's happening, you're not properly kind of like going through the experience and really encoding it into the brain. So whatever's not properly encoded into the brain, we're going to continue to think about it. We're going to continue to re-experience it. And so a part of CBT, trauma-based therapy, is to help that person to re-experience that trauma so that they're encoding it properly into the memory. So again, like with the trauma narratives, writing out the narrative of what happened, thinking about the emotional experience that you had, how it impacts you, how it impacts your thoughts, and really just kind of like going about it that way helps to properly encode some of those memories.
Is there any advice you would give for helping someone who has who's been in like a suicidal state to kind of like, in what ways would you like encourage them to seek help or seek a therapist?
Yeah, so a lot of times we have to understand when people experience suicidal ideations and they feel as though they really want to take their lives, of course we want to provide them with the resources, say, you can text this number, you can call this number, but sometimes they're in a state where they feel like they can't reach out to anybody. And so simply being there, offering yourself, offering, what you can offer, like, hey, do you want me to cook for you today? Or do you want me to support you in this way? That can be, again, like therapeutic in itself. But also, like, if you feel as though that person's actually in danger to themselves or other people, we can always call community sources like the crisis hotline and things of that nature to help.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions?
I have a question. So when individuals, for example, if an individual has experienced a traumatic situation and has had maybe cognitive decline or some areas of brain damage, and they have overcome a lot of those stigmas or labels that were put on them when it first happened, what suggestions would you give the person? Because when they're moving forward and people are still putting those labels or still trying to limit them, the person may explain to the person, well, my trigger is this, but I can do X, Y, and Z. But people are constantly like putting that ceiling lower down for them. What suggestions would you give that person in terms of moving forward and still being able to move forward in society to do what they need to do?
Yeah, so that's one of those things. It's tough because we have no control over what people think about us, their judgments of us, and their expectations. All we can do is continue to like rise to the occasion and do what God has called us to do and to function the way we need to function in society. With that, hopefully other people will begin to see the changes that individual makes, but it's not promised. And that's why all we can do is to truly live in who God called us to be.
Actually, it's a personal question. I've seen my mom try to commit suicide 3 or more times when I was probably about 11 or 12. Although I had therapy, but I still struggle with that vision. Would CBT be something like really helpful for me?
Absolutely. CBT is very helpful. And again, I don't know your full situation, but based on what we know about CBT and like how it does help us with some of those scary moments in life, it can really help us with learning different ways of managing it, different coping skills, and also different ways of kind of thinking about the situation from that trauma-based perspective.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So I'll look into it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not going to get too personal. Can you just let us know like how you got started to become a therapist? Or what made you want to become a therapist?
Absolutely. So I always had a passion for helping people. I saw my dad, helping people. He's a pastor and doing a lot of pastoral counseling for individuals who were experiencing lots of different things in their lives. And I just wanted to kind of further that. While in college and studying psychology, though, in my junior year, I took a African American psychology class, and it was a wrap from there. I'm like, okay, I want to do this. I want to help my people. And from there, I just continued to read books about it and to learn more about Black psychology. And again, like incorporating my faith and helping the Black church specifically, that just has become a part of my passion and a part of my trajectory in my career.
Okay. So we do have information for you. We're going to get the information on the screen for our viewers if you want to take note of our information once it's shown. And does anyone else have any other questions while our viewers can get that information?
I'm not sure if we already asked this, but if so, let's just say it again. How should one know the difference between going to your pastor for counseling or needing clinical therapy?
Yes. And one of the things that I've been working on with another psychologist is helping pastors to understand and to know when to refer out to a clinical psychologist, because sometimes they might not always know. But if it's at a point to where you feel as though your pastor can provide the spiritual counsel and help with those areas, but you're still in need of like practical things to do and different strategies and different ways of being, it might be helpful to reach out to a therapist who can help with those. So.
You talked some before about activities to help release like serotonin and dopamine. Can you share more of those? That I think some of the stigma about mental health deals with being medicated. So what are some other things that people can do to release those chemicals in the brain that do simulate happiness and mood stabilization? So can you talk some more about some of those things?
Yes, I need to just say everybody on this panel has great nails. I'm over here trying to hide my nails because I need a refill, but everybody has their nails done.
You know my nails is not done. Why would you do that?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You know I did not do my nails, and you want to see it.
I'm looking at this side. Like, look at all the nails on this side.
I don't want to look at them. I don't look at them.
I'm not gonna lie, I just went yesterday.
I'm like, oh, that's a nice color. Oh, she got the design. Okay.
Yeah, we hood. This York Road over here. It's the
I just
county.
need a refill. I'm trying to hide. Oh.
We're no longer friends.
I'm sorry, friend. I'm sorry, friend.
I know. We're gonna get nails done. Okay.
But yeah, so when talking about natural ways to boost different neurotransmitters in the brain, basic things like exercise can be helpful. Going into the sun, making sure we're getting that vitamin D because that can improve our mood. Yes, I'm a firm
I've been in the
believer.
sun. Can you tell? It helps a lot.
No, because the sun can really be helpful, and we don't recognize how that's definitely a natural mood booster. Even thinking about simple things like naturally just breathing. Deep breathing can really help to regulate what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, and that helps with relaxation. And if they follow my page on Instagram, you guys can see like other tips I have on my page. So.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead. Marcella, you had a question?
Brought up about the sun and everything, but music and aromatherapy, those are the things that really help a lot. Do you use those in your practice as well, along with CBT when you're doing the cognitive brain therapy? Do you put the aromatherapy and the music in with that?
I used to before the pandemic. I used to have it all set up. But now I'm 100% virtual. But I do encourage my clients to do it for themselves, though. So what you're saying is absolutely 100% true. So.
And what about I'm not going to say the name of the app, but let's just say apps that have music and sounds and things of that nature. Do you subscribe to that type of therapy as well?
It depends. Yes, it depends. It depends on the app. It depends on what they're doing and what they're talking about. I have different beliefs when it comes to, I'm gonna just keep it 100. Pastor Tony, you could rebuke me later if I'm wrong, but I'm a believer in like things like mindfulness and going into the spiritual realm where Jesus Christ is not the center of it. You're asking for trouble. I've had plenty of people say they've had experiences where they did mindfulness strategies and they started to have demonic visitations. And so, we have to be mindful of like Christian mindfulness is a thing, Christian yoga is a thing. Like, those types of things are important for us as believers, even as non-believers. Like we're not about to go into, the enemy's territory again without Jesus being the center of that. So.
That's why I asked, because certain things playing in your subconscious.
Yeah, but
That's
I'm
when you are, when you're resting, things
Yeah.
can enter into your spirit, and that's why I asked the question.
Well, ladies, I wish we had more time. Dr. Chanda, I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all the information you've shared. We will be following your page. And thank you to Pastor Tony Smith for allowing us to be a part of the vision of Victorious Ministries International. Until next time, we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.